Welcome to our Tuesday morning breakfast forum. We thank you all for coming out. We're going to go ahead and get started. Now we're going to turn it over to Mr. Kareem of Self-Taught Counseling and Consulting.
Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very, very excited and honored to be here to basically share a bit of my testimony and my story as to why I'm advocating for counseling to be mandated in law enforcement training. Let me give you a brief bio about me, but before I do that, let me open up with a question. If you had the ability to predict the future, how would it impact your decisions today? I'm going to say it again. If you had the ability to predict the future, how would it impact the decisions you make today? There's a formula I learned in my journey thus far, and it goes something like this. Today is yesterday's future. What I did yesterday created the conditions for today, and what I do today will create the conditions for my tomorrow. That's a formula I learned from my process. So let me give you my credentials and why I'm here today. I graduated from UC Charlotte with 4.0 in clinical mental health counseling. I'm a dual licensed therapist. Not only do I work with people who are suffering from mental health conditions, but I'm also a clinical addiction specialist with a specialty as a certified clinical trauma professional. So I help people with PTSD and all types of trauma.
I just interrupt you to say that as I age, my hearing gets to be slower.
Slow down. You know what, thank you, sister, because you know, those are my nerves. So, you know, my wife will tell me to pump my brakes a little bit, right? And plus my New York issues going on. But anyway, all right. So I'm going to slow down. I'm going to go 20 miles per hour, you know, I'm going to go to speed limit. So I have these credentials that I earned from UC Charlotte. In addition to that, I'm also an author. I'm a public speaker, and I authored a book called Breaking the Code of Silence, A Cop's Journey to Triumph and Truth. And in this book, I talk about my life. I use my life as a case study to discuss some of the challenges that exist within the law enforcement profession that oftentimes are not addressed. Prior to becoming a clinical mental health counselor, there's some other credentials you need to know about. I was a police officer for 8 years with the Salisbury Police Department. If you don't know where Salisbury is, that's about 45 minutes north of Charlotte. And it's a small municipality. And I was there for 8 years. I was a rookie police officer of the year. I had a number of substantial drug busts. I was a part of the SRT unit, which is a special response team. And one of the transitions that allowed me to get to this point today is the fact that I was sued 4 times for using excessive force, and I was also indicted on 2 counts of using excessive force. Granted, I went to trial and I was found not guilty in 2013, but that ordeal, but that event, those experiences changed me. They caused me to look at how did I end up in a predicament that I did not desire to be in. There's nothing like being a police officer and sitting in a jail cell among other people getting ready for your first appearance. And when I say that was an epiphany or eye-opening experience, it's what gave birth to what I do today. It's what gave birth to my business, Self-Taught Counseling and Consulting, and the advocacy, and also my book. And so, with that understanding, I want to talk to you today as a dialogue or a conversation about what are some of the challenges taking place today in our country and how can we make sense of it, because the reality is the reason we're all sort of divided about law enforcement and how they're targeting young black boys, it comes from miscommunication. So what I'm going to detail for you today is how the training works and how it goes into creating the challenges that are presented in our community. I graduated BLET, Basic Law Enforcement Training, in 2002. In the academy, what they teach you is to look out for behaviors. It's designed to keep the officer safe. Basic law enforcement training is designed to keep the officer safe so that that officer goes home the same way he came in, okay? What that looks like, officers are trained in a hyper-vigilant state, in a fear-based environment where, if you understand the neurobiology behind fear, when you are in fear or fright, you'll freeze, You will fight or you will take flight. One of the three options, naturally. Officers are conditioned to do what? What do you think? Fight. Address the threat. Okay? Oftentimes in many of these incidents where you hear law enforcement officers, law enforcement involved shooting, you will hear that I was in fear of my life. That's a part of the training. If an officer's training, policy, and the law doesn't support his actions, it's highly likely he will be found guilty. But if he acted or he articulates according to his training, policy, and the law, then it's highly likely he will be found not guilty in spite of public perception. Okay? In these trainings, they'll teach you, they'll show you shoot or don't shoot videos. They'll show you videos where officers' lives have been taken according to their dash cam or some type of surveillance where officers were ambushed or their lives were taken by an unsuspecting suspect, a traffic stop, whatever it may be. And these videos leave you as the officer sitting in the position of, I will never let that happen to me. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm not going to be that training module or that statistic that they'll use in the future. So guess what? I'm going to make sure I get the bad guy before he gets me. Because I'm the good guy. That's how it's presented in law enforcement training. How it works is that law enforcement officers are trained according to behaviors. They're not trained according to complexion, racial ethnicity, or anything like that. They're trained according to behaviors. What does that look like? If a suspect reaches, if he runs, if he flees, if he doesn't comply with officer commands, he becomes unpredictable, he or she. And that creates the level of hypervigilance that causes officers to fear for their life. Because now, this situation that I'm supposed to control with verbal commands is now entering into a space of unpredictability because you're not listening to me. And when you don't listen to me, I become afraid. I don't know what you're going to do. And so you'll see officers shoot sometimes before they ask questions. And it's based upon how they've been conditioned to do the job. Many of us, if not all of us, I want you to hear me very clearly, we're told what to think instead of how to think. And in law enforcement training, officers are told what to do if situations go this way. So when an officer sees triggers, suspect reached, suspect didn't comply, I couldn't see suspect had a cell phone or whatever it may be, he can't discern that in a state of shock or in a state of fear. He just goes by behavior. And that's what he responds to. The public sometimes get caught up in the perception of how the stories are framed in the media. Typically the media, and I know this from my own personal experience, which is why I just take the media with a grain of salt. They show you half the story and present it as the full story. And this is where people become enraged or incensed with, I can't believe that happened. But you don't know what led up to the situation. So we can't demonize the law enforcement officers because they have a very challenging, a very difficult, a very complicated job to do. We're talking about making a decision within a split second when it comes to deadly use of force. Now the law states this, 15A-401D2. It states that if an officer reasonably believes is all he needs to understand. Reasonably means that it's his discretion, her discretion. So if one officer reasonably believes that this is a threat, that's all he needs to be justified in using force. Another officer may see the same situation and say, no, I don't think it's necessary. But it's up to that officer who takes action to justify why he did what he did according to the policy, the training, and what the law gives him permission, him or her permission to do. Okay? Now let me give you a bit about my story. I grew up in the Bronx, and I grew up in some not so delicate circumstances. And little did I know that the circumstances I persevered through in order to obtain a scholarship to come down south were things that I normalized. I would say that I had PTSD growing up. I've seen dead bodies. I've seen people bleed out before I became a police officer. I know friends that have died. When I'm talking about my teenage years, and I still had to go to school. Granted, I was left back twice in high school for being a behavioral problem. Because again, the stresses that I experienced in my neighborhood in a single parent household stunted my ability to obtain new knowledge and new information on how to act. So there's a difference, there's a different culture. The language is different in certain communities, especially communities of poverty, where we look at life, the bad is good. it's inconsistent with what, again, societal norms expect. So when we think about that young African-American male who's in the hood with his pants sagging, or he's hustling drugs to provide for himself, or he's catching a lick, going to rob people to get something that he doesn't have, in his mind, this is how I come up. It's good, but it plays right into the hands of what officers enforce. And then we get into this thing where we seem like our communities are being targeted when we're operating according to narratives that don't serve us. And oftentimes this doesn't get addressed because people write these things off as that child is a problem. I was written off. I was made to believe that I had a problem. And yes, I did have a problem, but suspending me wasn't the solution. No one had the ability or the wherewithal, the intelligence to say, hey, you know, this child is going through some stuff. He needs some type of assistance. Instead, I was just penalized for expressing myself the best way I knew how. Because I didn't know how to articulate my emotional disconnect with happiness. So I had a lot of problems growing up that I didn't know how to resolve, and I normalized it. It became my norm. It followed me into the profession, and then when I became a police officer, I had this ideology that I can go into the hood, where they're at, and I can reach my people and help them. And you know what I was confronted with? When I went to the hood? Oh, y'all laughing? Y'all already know what it is. I wasn't aware enough to understand that they were speaking to my uniform. I thought they were talking to me directly. You sellout, you cornball, you Uncle Tom. I'm like, yo, hold up, y'all don't even know me. I'm trying to build relationships with y'all. Like, how y'all jumping me like this? And it became really easy via my field training officers and the culture of law enforcement to become the adversary. Oh, that's how y'all gonna do this? All right, we can play this game then. And it was real easy to not have any mercy or empathy whenever I arrested anybody, because if that's how you want to play this game, then let's play it. And it was a huge internal conflict within being an African American officer, because from a strategic standpoint, I look back in retrospect, I was intentionally put into the neighborhoods where there were mostly black folks, because the white officers weren't interested in going in and getting into any problems because of the racial perspective of the situation. So it's better if black folks police their own. But here comes the challenge. It's adversarial because, you know, law enforcement represents the belt, if you will, in this country. We're talking about over the last 300-400 years, law enforcement has been used as a belt in the black community, or to keep the black community under control. When you think about the laws, we're talking about slave code laws, we're talking about Willie Lynch, we're talking about, excuse me off the top of my head, but back in the 60s, Jim Crow laws and all these things, we're talking about law enforcement being used as a belt to control the black community. So yeah, there's some historical stuff there that I don't think we fully resolved, we fully communicated or fully resolved and reconciled. And so this stuff is now generationally being passed upon to our younger generation without anyone being interested in, all right, how do we sit down and have a conversation? It becomes very difficult to have a conversation when you get law enforcement administrators and city council folks who will come and have a town hall meeting at whatever venue, and then they give you, or they subscribe, politically correct answers. You ask a question and they give you answers that would hold you at bay, but they never really answer the question. And let me tell you something, internally, when it comes to a law enforcement agency, the officer that's interacting with the community on a regular basis hears that, he or she now understands it's uncomfortable or undesirable to speak against what the politically correct suggestion is that the administration just gave the community. And the community has no clue whether it's true or false. You're just being told what it is. And so you have no choice because you don't know to just go along with the flow. And it's highly frustrating for each officer. This is why officers have such a tremendous amount of burnout, unaddressed stress, which I call is a mess if left unaddressed. It's what led to my lawsuits. I became so frustrated and burnt out with the idea of not being able to do my job because of political correctness or politicians trying to dictate how officers should do their job. It drove me somewhat insane, and it wasn't just me. It was other officers as well, but we didn't understand the core of the problem. It was the culture. This is just how we did. This is how we do what we do. There's a reason. You can't have smoke without fire, right? There's a reason why you have a lot of police officers going through lawsuits, going through alcoholism, going through divorce, going through domestic violence, going through heart attacks, suicide. What do you think, that's just a norm? There's a problem that's not being addressed. And it's very unfortunate because we have many officers like me, thank goodness I'm still here, suffering in silence because they have nowhere to go because of the concern that they will be labeled unfit for duty if they were to voice a concern that they have problems or issues coming inside of the job, coming from the job. And that's dangerous. An officer who's more proactive about his mental health is in a better predicament than one who doesn't address it at all. And unfortunately, the culture is set up to where officers are refraining from addressing it because it will make them undesirable, an undesirable keep. There's a reason why officers are leaving. Money's not going to fix the problem. I can tell you that right now. It's an internal thing. It's internal. We all have experiences. We all have a background that created who we are today. We're byproducts of all of our experiences, good, bad, and different. And stress comes in two forms. It's either manageable or it's unmanageable. Officers who have a support system, who have a wife, perhaps a loving wife, an understanding wife, or a support system, they're in better shape than that officer who doesn't. Oftentimes, we don't talk about the undesirables associated with the uniform because the uniform is supposed to be perceived as honorable, noble, heroic, courageous. When we see an officer, we have a perception of it. People in the hood will look at the uniform and say enemy, an extension of systemic oppression, a problem. We all have perspectives on the uniform, and they're not consistent. Some people will feel safe if they see officers in the community. Some people won't. Some people will fear. And so it's this dialogue that we are not able to get to because of the political correctness and how information that we share can be perceived. So we want to make sure we present it in a way that's acceptable and not confrontational or damaging to create liabilities in the profession. But I'm here to tell you that if they don't mandate counseling to be a part of law enforcement training, we're going to have more incidents where officers are losing their lives either in the line of duty or taking their own lives. And I'll give you a perfect example of that because I had suicidal ideation and homicidal ideation back in 2010 when I was going through my ordeal and when I was exiting the profession. I write about it in my book. And it was a day where I came home. I was on administrative duty after an incident regarding a fight in a club, and I had to break it up, and the camera started rolling after I took action. It didn't show what everybody else did prior to that, but that's how the media works. And I remember one day going home, and I was taking off my duty gear and stuff, and I just remember feeling so low and so depressed and in a funk. And I took out my duty holster, my weapon, my duty holster weapon, which was a .45, and I said, it'll be so easy to off myself right now. I ain't got to deal with this pain anymore. That was my thought. It ran through my head. And right behind that thought, I saw a picture of my son, my oldest son. He's 15 today, but at the time he was 6, 7 years old. I saw a picture or an image of my son behind that big .45. And then behind him, I saw a future that I had to get lived. The possibility, the hope of, you know what? This is a temporary thing. Change is inevitable. And I was able to put that gun back in my holster. I cried, and then I prayed. And asked God to keep me through this whole ordeal because all of it was unexpected, unpredictable. I went through a 2-year stint of being unemployable. No other law enforcement agency would hire me because I was going through this investigation with the state and the federal government. And then I tried to get a job at Food Line, at all these different supermarkets or whatever, and they wouldn't hire me because I was overqualified. I had a master's in public administration, so I was stuck. And at that time I had twins, just had twins with my wife, and I was a stay-at-home dad. So I was changing diapers, burping, feeding, and doing all that good stuff. What an appreciation, what a journey, what an ordeal. I grew up pretty fast in that curriculum. And from it I learned how to be resilient. I learned how to tackle my vulnerabilities and put them on Front Street so that I can gain the power to do what I do today. Because the reality was, when I was in that jail cell, I was extremely ashamed. I was fearful of what people would think. And then what I did was I stepped out of that box of fear. Because I recognized that people had put me in that box of fear by what I was told to think. And I refused to abide by what people tell me to think anymore. I am a person who thinks independently of whatever anybody else's rules or guidelines are. We truly all have power. We just don't give ourselves permission to use it, because we want to go with the flow, what everybody else does. And officers feel the same way, because to step out of bounds or to discuss things, challenges, is inconsistent with the law enforcement culture. So how do we help officers? I believe that if we mandate counseling during their BLT, during their basic law enforcement training or their academy time, it conditions the officer to recognize that it's not just one way. You can repackage that fear. And everybody that looks like a threat doesn't have to be a threat. And instinctively, we're all conditioned by the same thing. We see the trap music, we see trap videos, and we hear some of these songs and how violent they are. Guns, drugs, and criminality. Everybody's conditioned by this. And when we see people who match or resemble the characters in this video, we become, oh, I remember the last time I saw that, there was some danger associated with that in the video. Running from the police in the videos. If that's not a clear message that there's an adversarial issue, or conditioning, if you will, and people who never been to those communities, that's what they take as their lesson, or their experience. Oh, that's how it goes. And they operate according to that. So you have people in these videos emulating behaviors that are consistent with law enforcement officers trained to enforce. And there you have the perfect cocktail of an intersectionality where officers are taking lives. So it's imperative. Our officers have a very difficult job to do. They're trained according to a minimum standard. I want you to hear me very carefully. They're trained according to a minimum standard, yet they are expected to operate according to a higher standard. And the basic law enforcement training lasts for about 622 to 20-something hours, which is about 6 months, a college semester. The top 3 things that officers focus on are defense tactics, firearm tactics, and criminal law, the laws that they're designed, petitioned to enforce. The least amount of time is spent on stress management. And we're talking about a job that every call is a stress-inducing situation, yet they only get 2 to 6 hours of training in that in the academy. There's something wrong there. We can't expect them to perform according to a higher standard if the minimum standard is not equipping them to meet that expectation. And I believe that that's what's directly impacting how officer wellness and health is being compromised in today's time. So we have to do more from a mental health standpoint in offering officers these outlets or coping strategies to address the stress that they deal with. I want you to imagine this, that if every step you took, let's say you had to take 20 steps from here to the door, and at every step, I add 20 pounds onto your load. You gotta carry 20 pounds. Every step, here's another 20, that's 40. Here's another one, that's 60. And I keep adding that for 20. Do you think you'll make it to the door with the weight that I put on you? Probably not. And that's what we're talking about. Officers dealing with a ton of stress that they never get to offload, and it comes out in a toxic way where it may be out the end of their gun or putting somebody in the hospital. Be it a loved one or somebody that they encounter in the streets. And so officers need this help. And as a licensed therapist, I developed a curriculum to address it. And again, it's a sensitive topic, because if officers admit, or the agencies admit that, hey, our officers are struggling with stress, then it opens up everything to liabilities. But if we make this thing mandated, then it's about addressing it proactively. And it's not about officers individually being hand-selected to go get counseling. It's just that everybody's getting exposure to it, so everybody's healthy, because they have access to this much-needed resource. So that's what I petition.
Mr. Kareem has a book called Breaking the Code of Silence. Again, has a book called Breaking the Code of Silence. So maybe you all would like to look further into his conversation.